Welcome to the Mind Cut series. Today we're diving deep into, well, a really fascinating mix of thoughts and observations. We're looking at everything from personal stories to some pretty big societal critiques.
That's right. And the goal really is to pull out the key insights, connect some dots that might not seem obvious, and give you a shortcut to understanding some complex stuff without getting totally bogged down.
Exactly. We wanted to distill it down. So we'll be moving across different scales today, won't we? From the individual level right up to, systemic things.
Precisely. We're not just looking at what people are observing, but digging into the why behind it, the mechanisms, and maybe even how these ideas could apply in our own lives. Practical takeaways, if you will.
Okay, practical takeaways. I like that. So let's kick off with something that might seem a bit random at first. O.J. Simpson's golf clubs.
Yeah, it sounds bizarre, doesn't it? But it's actually a lead-in. It connects surprisingly quickly to thinking about past policing methods.
Right, like how different things were back in the 90s. Forensics weren't as sophisticated, DNA testing wasn't everywhere.
And, the constant worry about evidence tampering, it's a really stark reminder that even these critical systems we rely on, well, they evolve and they haven't always been perfect. They're definitely not infallible.
That fallibility point is key, isn't it? The golf club thing, it's like this weird, notorious hook.
Exactly, a hook into questioning the real imperfections in institutions like the justice system. It pushes us to look beyond the headlines, beyond the simple story.
Which brings us neatly to the next point, this human habit of creating really simple narratives. Good guys, bad guys. Especially when we feel, threatened or pressured.
Oh, absolutely. It's a cognitive shortcut, isn't it? It makes us feel secure, perhaps, but it can seriously blind us to the actual complexity of a situation.
So from a cognitive science angle, what's happening there?
Well, you're looking at things like confirmation bias.
Wow.
We actively seek out stuff that fits what we already believe. And also this need for cognitive closure. We want an answer, any answer, even if it's incomplete or wrong.
And the practical result is polarization.
Yeah, often you see complex social issues, political debates, just boiled down to these simplistic moral fights. It kills constructive dialogue, really, makes finding real solutions much harder.
Okay, sticking with complexity, the next bit tackles modern life. The constant distractions, right? Specifically, algorithms.
Algorithms built purely to grab our attention for the shortest possible time. And the worry is, what does that constant chase for clicks do to our ability to focus long term? Does it mess with our maturity even?
How do they actually work, these algorithms? What's the mechanism?
Well, a lot of it is based on reinforcement learning. Basically, they learn what keeps you clicking, scrolling, watching, and then they feed you more of that. It trains your brain to want that instant hit of dopamine, that immediate reward.
And the downside is?
The downside is potentially wrecking our attention spans, making it harder to, say, read a book or do deep, focused work without constantly feeling that itch to check your phone. Those are, pretty crucial skills for personal growth, for professional life.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so if we're talking about these pressures, these potentially damaging simplifications, what's the counterpoint? The source material brings up an interesting idea for the opposite of tyranny.
It does, and it's maybe not what you'd expect. It suggests play.
Play, like kids' games.
Well, yes and no. It's more about voluntary engagement. Choosing to join in, following agreed-upon rules, something intrinsically rewarding but also kind of delicate. The idea is that this specific kind of play is actually fundamental.
Fundamental for what?
For building healthy relationships, healthy micro-communities. Think about it. Tyranny is all about imposed control, zero agency. Play, the kind we're talking about, requires you to join willingly. You accept the rules, but you're motivated from within.
Like a sports team. Or maybe even just playing cards with friends.
Exactly. It fosters cooperation, negotiation, social bonds, all without coercion. So the takeaway is maybe actively creating spaces for that kind of voluntary, enjoyable interaction could actually help build resilience against more authoritarian tendencies, starting small at the local level.
Interesting. Okay, shifting gears quite a bit here. From play to something perhaps even more fundamental, contraception and its impact on relationships, especially considering potentially different biological drives.
Right. The core idea discussed is that widespread contraception fundamentally changed the game by separating sex from the near certainty of procreation, at least historically, and that might influence how men and women approach sex, commitment, relationships.
Can you unpack the biological perspective a bit more?
Sure. So historically speaking, from a purely biological imperative view, for men, success was often linked to, well, maximizing the chances of passing on genes. For women, sex carried the potential for a huge investment pregnancy, childbirth, raising that child. Contraception gave women unprecedented control over that.
So understanding that historical context helps analyze today's dynamics.
It can provide a framework, yeah, for looking at shifts in expectations around sex, partnership, commitment. But the crucial point is biology isn't destiny, right? The practical application here is recognizing these potential underlying differences, maybe historical echoes, but emphasizing conscious communication and mutual understanding in modern relationships. Biology is a factor, not a blueprint.
Which leads us right into marriage and commitment. Why do people stick together, especially now when, arguably, options seem more plentiful? The source mentions love, sacrifice, kids.
It breaks down commitment into several parts. It's not just romance. It's often a very conscious choice, deciding to prioritize the shared goals, over me in any given moment.
And kids are a big part of that.
A huge part. Often, that shared vulnerability, the massive joint investment in raising children, it forges an incredibly deep bond. And then there's empathy, truly understanding your partner's world almost as well as your own. That's powerful glue.
So the practical takeaway is nurture those things. Shared goals, empathy, prioritizing the relationship.
Absolutely. Those are the building blocks for something lasting.
But it's not always smooth sailing. The discussion also brings up the fear of marriage, the potential downsides of divorce, the huge costs, both emotional and financial, those legal horror stories.
Yeah, that definitely highlights the risks involved in formal commitment. The legal system around divorce, while necessary, can sometimes turn into this really damaging, expensive conflict zone.
So what's the practical advice there? Be scared.
Not necessarily scared, but aware. Understand the potential pitfalls. Talk openly before getting married. Have realistic expectations. And crucially, develop good conflict resolution skills within the relationship. It's about preparation, not paralysis.
Okay, but there's a really important counterpoint mentioned, positive role models, and how we act in public. Treating your partner with respect publicly.
Yes, that's vital. The piece uses the tragic example of Phil Hartman, which is a very stark illustration of where disrespect and volatility can lead. How we treat our partner in front of others says a lot about our actual commitment and respect.
Public humiliation versus public honoring.
Exactly. Public disrespect erodes trust, damages the foundation. Consistently showing respect, honoring them publicly, reinforces the bond. It also sets a positive example. The practical tip is simple. Be mindful of your words and actions, always, but especially in public. They have real weight.
This idea of public behavior seems to connect to the next topic, online behavior.
Yeah.
The negativity, the dunking.
Right. The appeal of being negative online, it often feels kind of hollow afterwards, doesn't it? Compared to earning genuine respect, building a real reputation. The anonymity and distance of the internet seem to amplify some of our less constructive impulses.
Why do people do it? The online negativity, the dunking?
Well, psychologically, it could be insecurity, maybe a quick way to feel dominant or get validation, even if it's fleeting and, frankly, pretty shallow. That temporary ego boost doesn't build anything real. True reputation comes from consistent, positive actions over time. Integrity.
So the takeaway is, think before you type. Focus on building something real online, not just tearing things down.
Pretty much. Be mindful. Ask yourself, is this constructive? Am I contributing something or just trying to score cheap points? There's a huge difference between an online win and long-term earned respect.
And speaking of reputation, the material differentiates between earned reputation and status gained through power games, especially online. It mentions virtualization. What's that about?
Virtualization, in this context, means you can kind of craft an online persona that might not match reality. It creates space for people who are good at manipulation, maybe, or just playing power games, to gain influence without the usual real-world checks and balances, without that face-to-face accountability.
So we need to be careful about judging people solely on their online presence.
Definitely. Critically evaluate. Look beyond the curated profile or the clever tweets. Consider their actual track record, their real-world actions. That's the practical skill distinguishing earned reputation from manufactured status.
This leads into a darker area, the idea of parasitical individuals or behaviors, within politics, academia, even personal life, drawing parallels with biology.
Yeah, it's an unsettling analogy, but potentially useful. A biological parasite drains the host without giving back. Socially, you can see similar patterns. Individuals or groups exploiting systems, manipulating others, undermining collective goals, all for personal gain.
How do you spot that?
Well, look for patterns. Consistent lack of actual contribution, relying on manipulative tactics, using divisive language to benefit themselves, draining resources, whether financial or emotional. Identifying these patterns is key to protecting yourself, or the group, or the institution.
Okay, moving on. The conversation also touches on really complex, sensitive areas like identity, anti-Semitism, and the huge challenge of just figuring out what's true anymore, questioning even established media or historical accounts.
It reflects a broader erosion of trust, doesn't it? Trust in institutions and traditional news sources. It really underscores the need for critical thinking skills more than ever.
So practically, what does that mean? Don't trust anyone.
Not quite. It means being an active, critical consumer of information. Question assumptions. Seek out different viewpoints, especially ones you disagree with. Evaluate the evidence behind claims. Be wary of highly emotional language. Aim for nuance, not just accepting things at face value, no matter who says it.
This fits with the next point, different ways platforms handle content. Spotify is mentioned as an example, taking a different approach to moderation, even with tricky subjects like vaccines or the lab leak theory.
Right. Spotify's approach seems to lean towards distribution over censorship, essentially saying, we'll host it, you decide. It raises big questions about platform responsibility versus free expression.
So for us as listeners,
be aware that platforms differ. Don't assume everything you see or hear has been vetted in the same way. Exercise your own judgment, especially on controversial topics where there isn't clear consensus. Do your own homework.
Okay. Then there's this fascinating bit using biblical narratives, like the Exodus story, as a lens to analyze power, the dynamic between a tyrant and willing slaves.
Yeah, it's a powerful frame. Exodus is about liberation from external oppression, sure, but the willing slaves concept points to the internal barriers too. Fear, complacency, buying into the dominant ideology, things that keep people or societies trapped even when freedom is possible.
The practical takeaway there seems pretty profound.
It is. It's about critically examining the narratives we live by, questioning authority, both external and the internalized kind, and recognizing our own power, our own agency to resist things that feel oppressive.
Then we pivot to some very current issues. Concerns about certain political directions, policies like ESG, DEI, net zero, centralized planning, contrasting them with other views on climate or energy.
This section dives right into some major contemporary debates. These policies, ESG, DEI, net zero, are proposed solutions to big challenges like climate change and inequality. But the material also highlights the need to analyze them critically, meaning look at the potential trade-offs, the unintended consequences, who benefits, who might be harmed. We need to consider diverse perspectives on whether these policies actually work and what their real impact is. The practical advice for listeners is engage critically. Don't just accept the slogans. Seek out different analyses. Think about the long-term effects.
Okay, and then, almost full circle, we come back to personal development, using the story of Moses and the burning bush.
Right. That image of the bush that burns but isn't consumed, it's presented as a metaphor for following your curiosity, that thing that grabs your attention, that seems significant even if it's off the beaten path.
And connected to that is voluntary self-sacrifice.
Yes. The idea that choosing to give something up, time, comfort, resources for a higher purpose, something you believe in, is actually foundational. Foundational for personal growth and for building strong communities, stepping towards the burning bush, essentially.
So practically, we should look for our own burning bushes.
Maybe. Identify what genuinely sparks your curiosity, your passion, and then consider what small step could you take towards it, even if it feels a bit uncomfortable or requires a sacrifice. That's where growth often happens.
This links to the reflections on personal growth itself, the difficulties, especially if you're in the public eye, but also the importance of real connection, positive feedback, and that odd idea of finding lightness in taking on responsibility.
It seems paradoxical, right? Taking on a burden, a cross, but feeling lighter. Psychologically, it makes sense if the responsibility is freely chosen, aligned with your values, and feels meaningful. Agency is key. When you believe in what you're doing, challenges feel less like burdens and more like, well, part of the meaningful journey.
And having supportive people around helps.
Immensely. Finding your tribe, people who offer genuine encouragement and understanding, that's crucial. The practical application is actively choosing responsibilities that align with your core values and cultivating those supportive connections.
Okay, wrapping things up. The final points address the spirit of power, its dangers in relationships, the need to aim higher, and it revisits online discourse, negativity, the value of real curiosity over just winning.
Exactly. It emphasizes how power imbalances corrupt relationships and stresses aiming for mutual respect, shared higher goals. The critique of online negativity circles back to the idea of pursuing truth, being genuinely curious, rather than just scoring points or insulting people.
And the parasite problem comes up again.
Yes, the challenge of those exploitative behaviors within institutions. The suggested solution isn't just whack-a-mole, but strengthening the core values, building robust systems, maybe even creating new things that are healthier from the start.
But it ends on a hopeful note, cautiously optimistic.
It does. It suggests that despite the problems, if we consciously focus on these core principles, critical thinking, genuine connection, pursuing truth, taking meaningful responsibility, then renewal and positive change are actually possible. There's potential for a better future, but it requires effort.
Wow, okay. We have covered a lot of ground today. Really diverse ideas, personal, societal, historical. Hopefully this mind cut has given everyone some surprising facts, maybe some useful examples, and those aha moments we always shoot for.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. Maybe consider that tension in your own life. The pull of instant gratification versus long-term fulfillment. How aware are you of the algorithms nudging your choices? Could you tweak that relationship?
And what about play? That idea of voluntary, rule-bound engagement. Could introducing more of that in your relationships or community actually be a meaningful act, a small antidote to control?
And think about the dominant stories, the narratives out there in the world. Are they serving progress or someone's power agenda? How can you sharpen your own skills to tell the difference?
Finally, that idea of voluntary sacrifice, aligning actions with purpose. What's your burning bush? What spark of curiosity is calling to you right now, maybe inviting you off the familiar path?
This deep dive, it's really just a starting point, isn't it? We absolutely encourage everyone listening to keep exploring these themes, question everything, and continue your own quest for knowledge. Thanks so much for joining us.